All right, everyone, so let's get into it. We're going to go back into our skeletal muscles and talk about the organization. Remember that your skeletal muscles, there's over 650 different muscles, and every muscle is an organ. And the muscle itself, okay, our muscle, what is inside of the muscle? So you have the actual muscle tissue, okay? You have the muscle tissue, but it also has a number of other things. For example, you have your nerves and your blood vessels, okay? So nerves, blood vessels, okay, abbreviation, blood vessels. And then you also have, that's going to be broken down more into like your microfilaments and microfibers, which we're going to get to, which is in the actual muscle tissue, all right? Then there's also the tendon. And the tendon is what is going to connect your muscles to your bones so you can move, all right? Now, if we're going to do, let's say, histology, and we're going to look at the different cell types that's inside of a muscle, what are we going to find? Because the muscle, as I said, is composed of different tissues, so there's different cells that make up the skeletal muscle, right? So, for example, you have maybe only like 50 to 70% of the nuclei is going to be your actual myocytes, okay, or your muscle cell. And that's going to depend on it's context dependent. It really depends on the training that you have and so on. But the rest, right, so the 25 to 50% of the nuclei, that's going to be other non-myofibrillar cells, including things like your vasculature system, your endothelial cells, your pericytes, your vascular smooth muscle cells, and then you have your myogenic lineage, including your progenitor cells, your immune cells, your macrophages, your lymphocytes, the neutrophils, and then you have your stromal cells, your fibroblasts, and the FAPs, and then you have your neural cells, like specifically because we're in the peripheral nervous system, so that's your Schwann cells, and then you have your adipocytes. So there's lots of cells that are going to be make up that, so you have to be careful if you're doing like histology, you see all these nuclei, again, it's not all from skeletal muscle. Okay, and now we need to talk about the connective tissue. That was the other part of what's inside of the muscle, right? So what is the connective tissue? What are those components? The cellular components of the muscle tissue is what we need to talk about, because this has a lot of the fibroblasts, and they're the primary cells of the skeletal muscles, connective tissue, okay? They synthesize and maintain the extracellular matrix, and that's composed of many different parts, right? For example, there's the collagen fibers, there's elastin, there's non-fibrillar extracellular matrix components like your proteoglycans, your glycosaminoglycans, adhesive glycoproteins, and so on. Okay, now we have the interstitium, which is basically this fluid-filled component within and between the connective tissues, and it's part of the interstitial space of the extracellular matrix. So in skeletal muscle, it's actually found between extracellular matrix layers and around the muscle fibers. And, you know, if we think about this, for example, if we have your, here's a cross-section of every muscle. So you have like your muscle, right? And we're going to take like a cross-sectional area, and we drew this right here. And then we have if we draw some of these right here, okay, these are going to be your fascicles. And then under, a fascicle is a bundle of muscle fibers. And then in that is we have these guys here, a whole bunch of them. These ones are your muscle fibers, okay? These are your muscle cells, your myocytes, okay? And what we're talking about, the interstitium, is actually the stuff in between here, okay? This is the interstitium. So if you think about like my fingers here, each one is a muscle fiber, and they're going to be like running next to each other. And then in between that is the interstitium. And these have a number of functions, like there's the fluid reservoir for tissue hydration. It also serves as a pathway for a solute transport and diffusion of nutrients and metabolism and signaling molecules. It also helps for like a mechanical shock absorber. Like it's a viscoelastic damping, so to speak. And as well as it's a medium for the force transmission, particularly lateral force transmission. It basically couples between the fibers of the extracellular matrix to the collagen proteins. All right. Now, you'll understand that a little bit more as we do some of these more diagrams. But let's talk about the collagen in more detail. collagen is a big thing these days. Everyone's talking about collagen supplementations. And actually, there's actually 28 different types of collagen in the human body. And they all share a common motif, which is like basically glycine and then amino acid, repeat. And this forms the triple helix. And these collagen types differ really mainly in their amino acid sequence, as well as their interruptions and continuity in how the molecules assemble and cross-link together. Now, there's a few types of collagens that I do think you should know, especially for muscle physiology. There's a type 1 collagen. Now, the type 1 collagen is really is important for your tensile strength and for like your skin, for your bones, tendons, and so on. But we can keep some skin, okay? Skin, and we can say strength. And it's kind of like this type 1 collagen, you can think of it more like a rope or steel cable, all right? So we can just put cable maybe. Okay, now your type 2 collagen, this is actually not very important for skeletal muscle, but it's very important because it gives flexibility and compliance. It does, but it's mainly about compression and support because it's talking about your cartilage, all right? So type 2, you can think about as your cartilage, all right? And now you have your type 3. This is what really gives you flexibility and compliance. And this is important for your blood vessels, the skin, organs, and different things, all right? So we can just say compliance. And now we have our type 4 collagen. And this is important for your basement membrane. It has a number of other things, but we really want to focus on this muscle physiology here. And then your type 5, and your type 6. We'll talk about it a little bit, but like type 5 regulates your collagen fiber size and your assembly control, and then type 6 connects cells to the surrounding extracellular matrix and linking collagen. Now, when you look at how does the collagen work, you have your tropocollagen molecule, and this forms a triple helix. And this triple helix, okay, so if we look at this, we have the tropocollagen, okay. Tropocollagen, it's just a molecule, this is just a helix. And this is going to combine together the helix structure to form your next, which is going to be your fibrils, all right? So we can put fibrils, and then your fibrils combine together to form, I don't know if you can read this anymore, but to form your fiber. And then your fibers are going to come to form your actual connective tissue, all right? So it's good to understand that. All right, now let's go back and talk about the extracellular matrix, the ECM, a little bit more. In fact, we can just use this drawing a little bit to talk about the ECM, because it is important. For example, you have the structural organization, and this is also going to provide your gross architecture of the muscle, and it's going to serve as a scaffold during the growth and development, and it also supports your blood vessels and your nerves, right? The other part, besides the structure, is the mechanical and functional roles. And this specifically, things like elasticity and the recoil, the elastin, and it's like a crimped, wavy collagen, as well as a resistance to passive stretch. And then a big one is the force transmission. Okay, in fact, I just want to write this here for this class here. ECM, important for force transmission. We're gonna transmission. You probably can't read that well. This force transmission is going to be really important, and this happens within the muscle, as well as between muscle fibers. Okay, between the muscle fibers, and then as well as the different layers of the muscle, and from the muscle to the actual tendon, so you can actually move your bone. All right. Now, in order to understand all of that, we need to understand the various layers of the skeletal muscle, the layers of the actual connective tissues. So if we can actually just use this same drawing here. Again, if you have your muscle, that first layer around the muscle, that outside layer, so if you look at your muscle, you have your skin on top of that, and then underneath that, you have like your fascia, and more specifically, you have your epimysium. And so you think of like when you're eating your chicken or whatever, and you have that layer of skin, that's your epimysium that surrounds the entire muscle belly. And that primarily comprises your type 1 collagen, okay, and your type 3 collagen. Okay, those are going to be really, really important to keep in mind. Now, this is, so the layer around here, in fact, I can use a different marker. Here's one. Use a different marker here. The layer around this right here is going to be called your epimysium. Epimysium, okay? Now we go into here where we have your fascicle, right? A fascicle is a bundle of muscle fibers. And what is this layer? Right? This also has a layer of connective tissue around. What is this one called? This one is called your perimysium. Okay, now, so this is the fascicle bundle of muscle fibers, and we have the individual muscle fibers. And the individual muscle fibers, guess what? That's right, there's also a layer around each one of these, okay? And this layer, we're going to call endomysium. All right, so epi, outside, peri, between, or right, the fascicles, and endo is the inside. That's the endomysium. Now, as I mentioned, all of these connective tissues, they are primarily composed of type 1 and type 3 collagen. That's going to be important to remember. Now, underneath the epimysium, or sorry, the endomysium, you have another layer, which we call the basement membrane. All right, this is right under here. This is the basement membrane. And the basement membrane is primarily consists of the type 4 collagen. And that's going to be really important for, again, the lateral force transmission. Okay, so now let's really dive a little bit more deeper into these different layers. So there's actually, we could say, 4 layers of every one. So the first layer is the epimysium. Let's talk a little bit more about the epimysium to really understand what that is. Again, this is the protective sheath that surrounds the entire muscle. And it's pretty large, tightly woven bundles of collagen, like between 800 to around 600 to 800 nanometers in diameter. And it's collagen fibers that have a wavy appearance to it, and it tapers to blend with the tendons or aponeurosis when the connective tissue organize into a flattened sheet tendon, right? And then this is also, the epimysium is also continuous with the perimysium. Okay, so the epimysium is here, but it's actually continuous with the perimysium. And what I mean by that is it's actually interconnected with collagen fibers that allows these two to be continuous. And this is important for the force, the lateral force transmission that we're talking about. Now we go to the perimysium. Now this again surrounds this fascicle, right? And then a fascicle again has a bundle of muscle fibers. Now the fascicles, these typically run the entire length. The epimysium itself surrounds the fascicles, and they run the length of the entire muscle. Although the muscle fibers themselves usually do not run the entire length. All right, that's important because it has this sheath of the perimysium so that you can get that full force transmission going through the entire muscle. All right. Now this is also comprised of large bundles of tightly woven of collagen, and it also envelopes and anchors onto the various arterioles and the venules and the intramuscular nerves and so on. And it connects to the endomysium, which surrounds the individual muscle fiber. All right. So again, the perimysium is going to connect into the endomysium, and that's is what's surrounding the individual muscle fiber, right? Now, let's talk more specifically about the endomysium. So the endomysium itself is what envelopes each individual muscle fiber, as I mentioned, right? It's what goes around that muscle fiber. Now, it's a network of collagen fibrils, and it's a lot smaller, like 60 to 120 nanometers in diameter, depending on where you're at. And it envelopes and anchors the nerve supply and the capillaries, and it connects to the basement membrane, all right? And so it's actually right up against that. Now, the basement membrane, we go into a little bit more detail here. The basement membrane actually we call it the basement membrane region. It has two parts. There's the basal lamina and then the reticular lamina. So I'll show you here in just a minute. But the basement membrane region is basically the immediate extracellular matrix surrounding the muscle fiber. It's a flexible, and it's small. It's actually like even smaller than the endomysium, like in terms of its width, right? Like 40 to 120 nanometers thick. And it's this sheet-like specialized extracellular matrix that makes this up, and it's located external to the sarcolemma, and is it's closely associated with the endomysium. So it actually like connects right next to it. And now it's made up of different important collagen types. Like I said before, the basement membrane is mainly made up of the type 4 collagen, all right? That's going to be the big one on that. And it's this network of forming collagen, and it also has like laminin and the proteoglycans and adhesive linker glycoproteins that organize and stabilize the matrix. And then there's the specialized basal lamina proteins that organize the neuromuscular junction as well, which we're going to get into. So the basement membrane is synthesized by multiple cell types also. So if we look at each part, so again, the basal lamina, that's produced largely by the muscle fiber and by associated cells, such as the Schwann cells at the neuromuscular junction, whereas the reticular lamina, which is right up against the endomysium, is produced primarily by the fibroblasts in the surrounding endomysium, all right? Now, this is important for the structural support, the cell polarity and differentiation and the migration and repair and organization of the membrane. And these on all these proteins, including those of the neuromuscular junction, and it's important in the cell signaling. So let's look at this basement membrane and really break this down a little bit more. As I mentioned, it consists of two parts, the reticular lamina, and that's continuous with the endomysium, and then the basal lamina. And the basal lamina, right, we can just put basal lamina, that has two parts to that also. You have the lamina lucida and the lamina densa. Okay, so we could do lamina densa, lamina lucida, or lamina rara is another word for that. And basically, this anchors the sarcolemma via transmembrane linkages, such as your integrins and the dystrophin glycoprotein complex, as well as it couples this to the cytoskeleton to the laminin and the type 4 collagen networks. And this ensures a bidirectional force transmission and the mechanochemical signaling. Now, if we look at this extracellular matrix interface in the intercellular continuity, so let's really look at the different layers as we go through this. All right. Maybe what we can do is just draw another little diagram so we can really dive into this. Maybe we'll just come over here. Okay. So I'm going to just draw this circle here, and this will be, again, a cross-section of the muscle fiber itself, and there's different layers that go around this entire thing. So actually, let's call this the endomysium, okay? So remember, you have the endomysium, and you go underneath that, and that's when you're going to hit the basement membrane. And with the basement membrane, if we draw this goes actually right up against the endomysium. And this would be called the rector lamina, okay, this part of the basement membrane. This is the basement membrane, and specifically the rector lamina. And underneath that, okay, underneath that part of the basement membrane, but another portion of that is where we have the basal lamina. And the basal lamina, as I mentioned earlier, is made up of two parts. You have the lamina densa, okay, we can put here, and then you have the lamina lucida. Okay, I'm just drawing this out again. I want you to see where we're going with this completely. It's underneath the lamina lucida that we have the glycocalyx. Okay, and the glycocalyx is what surrounds this whole thing as well. Okay, now what is the glycocalyx? So this is the glycocalyx. I'll just label this here. Glycocalyx. Okay, but this is basically a carbohydrate-rich coat on the external surface of the sarcolemma, and it's composed of the membrane-bound glycoproteins, proteoglycans, and it mediates the initial ECM adhesive mechanotransduction. And it's also important for signaling between the muscle fibers and the basement membrane because it sits right next to the lucida lamina and basement membrane. So it's able to have that interaction. Now, underneath the glycocalyx, okay, sorry, it's getting confusing, but underneath the glycocalyx, we have this guy right here. And this is your sarcolemma, all right? This is just your normal plasmalemma or your plasma membrane. That's all it is. It's a phospholipid bilayer that surrounds the muscle fiber, and it contains the specialized transmembrane protein complexes such as the integrins and the dystrophin glycoprotein complex that links the extracellular basement membrane to the intracellular cytoskeleton. All right? So that one is the basement membrane. So if you can think about these layers, right, as we go through the endomysium, the basement membrane, then the glycocalyx, then the sarcolemma, the plasma membrane, and then underneath that, you actually have this intracellular cytoskeleton network. That's basically it's a beta and gamma actin-based cytoskeleton, network that's organized into what we call costamers that we're going to talk about shortly. And these anchor the transmembrane protein complexes, such as the dystrophin and the integrins, and transmits the force from the sarcomeres, which we'll talk about soon. That's the smallest contractile unit of the muscle. The sarcomeres via the Z discs to the sarcolemma and ultimately to the extracellular matrix. All right, so that's this kind of cytoskeleton network inside, right underneath the sarcolemma, right? So we have all these layers, and that's going to help you to think about that lateral force transmission to understand all of these layers, so we can see how we generate force, how our skeletal muscles work. So we'll talk about the sarcomeres next.